I'm Mr. Midnight Hollow, your terrifying host, and tonight you'll hear every chilling detail in this episode of Terrifying Encounters, from ritual markings and a creature with a moose skull, to a brutal war between a cursed werewolf and the king of starvation himself, the original Wendigo. This is a story of survival, madness, and extinction. If you're already part of our community, your support means the world to us. Each like, comment, and share helps uncover more stories like this, or subscribe to see what rises from the depths of darkness and unfolds before you. Now, let's begin. Missoula, Montana. A quiet town surrounded by dense forests and silent mountains. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where neighbors still greeted each other by name. But that fall, everything began to change. The first disappearance was ignored. Marla Keene, a 22-year-old student at the University of Montana, went hiking in the Rattlesnake Hills and never returned. Police assumed she'd gotten lost, maybe fallen off a cliff, or been attacked by a bear. But the tracks ended abruptly. No blood, no signs of struggle, just an empty spot on the leaf-covered ground. Days later, Donnie Fields, a retired veteran, vanished from his cabin on the edge of Salmon Lake. His home was found open, lights still on, breakfast still warm on the table. One detail stood out. The back door, made of solid metal, had been torn off its hinges, not broken into, torn off. Local Sheriff Ernie Marlowe tried to calm the public, claimed it might be bears or a maniac wandering the woods, but everyone knew something else was going on. The nights felt different. The wind blew strangely, and the scent of rotten meat seemed to linger in the more remote streets. By the fifth disappearance, the town panicked. Ashley Dorset, a high school teacher, was found dead behind the school, or what was left of her. The body was torn open, the ribcage split like a book, ribs snapped, and the face, what remained of it, turned inside out. The autopsy revealed something even stranger. No blood. The corpse was dry, as if drained to the last drop. Sheriff Marlowe closed schools, requested reinforcements from the state, but no one came. It was as if Missoula had been erased from the map. Cell phones stopped working at the town's perimeter. Cars wouldn't start. Roads led to nowhere. People began leaving on foot. Few made it out. Tucker Maddox, 58, ex-hunter and former military, watched everything from the top of his cabin in the mountains. He wasn't the talkative type. Since losing his wife, he'd isolated himself with his dogs and shotgun, living off hunting and fishing. But he knew this wasn't the work of any ordinary animal. That night, when he heard distant howls that didn't sound like wolves but like something imitating a wolf, he locked the windows, turned off the lights, and grabbed his .308 rifle. Something was coming from the woods, and it didn't walk. It hunted. When he came down to town the next morning, he saw the marks on the asphalt. Deep scratches, like steel claws had been dragged across it. And tracks. But not normal footprints. They were long, distorted, with too many toes to be human, and claws that left grooves nearly a centimeter deep in the concrete. He went to the sheriff's office. Marlowe was pale, sweating, with a glass of whiskey in hand, and his gun on the desk. He was no longer the confident man from weeks before. He had seen something the night prior. Something he couldn't describe. "Tucker," he said with a hoarse voice. "That thing. It's not human." "I know," the hunter replied, without hesitation. "But you still think you can kill it with bullets?" The sheriff didn't answer, just looked down. Outside, the town was emptying out. Stores closed, cars abandoned. The streets were eerily silent, as if the town itself were holding its breath. On the local radio, the only station still broadcasting, a woman sobbed live. She said her son had disappeared in their backyard. She went to the bathroom for 2 minutes, and when she returned, there were only tracks, and a chewed-up toy covered in a black, sticky substance. Fear spread like poison. Churches began filling. Families hid in basements, stocking food and locking doors with whatever they had. But nothing worked. The creature, or creatures, came in even with everything sealed shut. Tucker began patrolling at night. He wanted to understand what they were dealing with. It was during one of these vigils that he saw it. From the top of a hill, using thermal binoculars, he saw the thing dragging a body along the road. It was tall, over 6 feet, with arms far too long, legs thin like branches, and skin pale and stretched like old leather. Its head resembled a moose skull with massive antlers. But what terrified him most was the sound the creature made. It whispered. It didn't roar, didn't scream. It just whispered. Disjointed words, broken phrases, as if it had learned to speak from humans. By eating them. Tucker backed away. He'd faced war, killed men, hunted bears. But this was different. This was the ultimate predator. And the worst was yet to come. The next morning arrived with a thick fog covering the town. The fog wasn't normal, too dense for that time of year, too heavy to be natural. It was as if the forest had decided to swallow Missoula whole. Tucker Maddox hadn't slept. He spent the night in silence, listening to the sounds from the woods. They weren't just footsteps. There was something more, as if many creatures moved beneath the trees, but without breaking branches, without making any sound. That was what scared him most. Their silence. On his ham radio, he heard desperate calls from citizens locked in basements. Some said they saw shadows with red eyes, peeking through windows. Others spoke of a man with no skin, who crawled along walls and opened doors without using hands. Most of these transmissions ended abruptly, with a scream, or the sound of the radio hitting the floor. At 8 a.m. that morning, Deputy Carl Mendez's body was found hanging upside down from a tree on the east side of town. His heart had been ripped out, not cut, but sucked from the inside out. Around the tree, symbols were scratched into the earth. Spiral markings, identical to those seen in indigenous caves in the area. It was as if the thing was performing a ritual. Sheriff Marlowe lost control. He gathered what was left of his team, a half-dozen men, and headed into the woods with heavy weapons. Tucker tried to warn him it was suicide, but they didn't listen. 4 hours later, only one returned. The young officer, Darrell Royce, limped into the station, covered in blood and with a vacant stare. He muttered nonsense. She was there. With the skin hanging, her mouth moved, but it wasn't hers. Then he vomited blood and dropped dead on the floor. No visible wounds, just a dark discoloration on his skin, like he was rotting from the inside. Tucker began studying old maps of the region. Visited an old friend, Arthur Nez, a native who lived alone in a trailer on the edge of the Flathead Reservation. Arthur was nearly 80 and didn't talk much, but when Tucker showed him the symbols around the deputy's body, the old man went pale. "Wetiko," he murmured, "a spirit born of hunger. When winter is cruel and man eats the flesh of his brother, it is born, and it never stops eating." "Wendigo?" Tucker asked. Arthur didn't reply. He simply stood up, went to a chest, and pulled out a necklace made of bones and teeth. He handed it to Tucker. "If you're going to fight, take this." But no, this thing doesn't die easily, or quickly. Sometimes, it never dies. That same night, what was left of the town collapsed. The supermarket was looted. Groups began to form, armed men, families trying to escape through the trails. But no one came back. A little girl appeared hours later, covered in blood. She said, the men from the forest ate her father. Her eyes were white, as if she had seen something the childish mind couldn't process. Tucker knew time was running out. He set traps around the city, prepared his hideout, reinforced doors and windows. But nothing would matter if he didn't find out what was really behind it all. In the early hours, while watching Highway 93 with his binoculars, he saw something unexpected. A figure running through the forest with superhuman speed. It was large, muscular, moving like an animal. But it wasn't the Wendigo. That thing was chasing the Wendigo. And then it happened. An explosion of violence, flashes of movement in the dark, trees falling, sounds of flesh being torn apart. The Wendigo and that new creature clashed for seconds, and then they vanished into the forest like shadows colliding. The next morning, Missoula's main street was covered in battle marks, dried blood, chunks of flesh, torn claws. But what shocked Tucker the most was what he found behind the hardware store. Half a human face, still fresh, blinking. But it wasn't just any face. It was Sheriff Marlowe's face. The town now had no leadership, no protection, no direction. Terror had taken over completely, and Tucker began to understand the most terrifying truth of all. They were no longer being hunted by just one creature. Now, they were prey caught in a predator dispute. The days that followed were a blur of blood and fear. The city of Missoula, once alive and full of students, families, and tourists heading for the trails, now looked like a blurred painting of despair. The sky remained cloudy, as if light had abandoned the town altogether. And the forest. The forest seemed more alive than ever. Tucker Maddox began tracking the battles. He followed the body parts, scratches on trees, broken bones scattered across backyards. Every mark told a story. Every corpse indicated the direction of a war happening behind the veil of reality. It wasn't just a hunt, it was a clash between monsters. On one of the coldest nights of that fall, he found a destroyed campsite on the banks of the Clark Fork River. 3 torn tents, an overturned trailer, and blood. So much blood that the ground seemed to breathe. But there was something different about this massacre. One of the bodies still had its hands raised, as if it died trying to protect itself, but the chest was completely open. What caught Tucker's attention, however, were the deep cuts, made with precision, like enormous claws, but in strategic places. That wasn't the Wendigo's doing. It was another creature, more animalistic, less ritualistic, more brutal, a hunter, and maybe a protector. On the 3rd night after the latest slaughter, Tucker heard a sound outside his cabin. It was low, deep, like heavy breathing. He aimed through the window, rifle ready, and saw it. Amidst the mist, a tall figure walked slowly. It was tall, covered in dark, coarse fur. The silhouette vaguely resembled a man, broad shoulders, strong legs, but the head was elongated, snout protruding, and the eyes glowed like embers. The creature stopped in front of the cabin. It didn't advance, didn't growl, just stared. Tucker kept his finger on the trigger, but he felt that shooting would be a mistake. For a second, the two stared at each other like enemy soldiers recognizing one another on the battlefield. Then, the creature turned and disappeared into the forest. The next morning, Tucker did something he had avoided since the attacks began. He went to the abandoned Methodist church at the end of Waterworks Hill Street. There were reports of families hiding inside, but upon arrival, he found only a trail of death. The pews were broken, windows destroyed. On the altar, claw marks and blood. But there was a survivor. Jade Halpern, a 17-year-old teenager, was hiding inside an open coffin at the back of the church. She trembled, covered in dried blood, wide-eyed. She told Tucker a creature came in during the night, very tall, with horns and white skin. It grabbed her father by the legs and tore him in two. She only survived because she stayed quiet, locked inside the coffin as if it were a real tomb. Tucker took her back to the cabin, though reluctantly. He didn't want anyone else under his protection, but he knew leaving her there was a death sentence. That night, they heard the screams. They came from the industrial zone, across the river, and this time, Tucker didn't wait. He grabbed the rifle, locked Jade in with the dog, and headed out. What he found was the first full confrontation he witnessed. The Wendigo was surrounded by flames lit by desperate townspeople trying to burn it. The creature, cornered, let out long screams, its antlers glowing in the firelight. It was grotesque, skinny, its skin tight against its bones. Its eyes had no pupils. It was as if its entire existence was hunger and pain. And then, the werewolf appeared. It leapt from the top of one of the warehouses. Its body, much larger than Tucker had imagined, fell onto the Wendigo with absurd force. Claws against claws, fangs against bones. The fight was insane, brutal, like two wild gods battling for control of a land forgotten by all. The werewolf fought on instinct, powerful, precise blows, but with something almost human. As if it knew what it was defending. The Wendigo, on the other hand, fought like a living shadow, fast, silent, slicing. In minutes, the bodies of the townspeople who had lit the fire were thrown against the walls. Some exploded upon hitting the metal containers. Others were torn apart and forgotten on the ground. The Wendigo fled, disappearing through the cracks in the warehouse like living smoke. The werewolf remained there, panting, covered in blood. Its eyes once again met Tucker's. And this time, it spoke. It was a hoarse whisper, forced as if the monster's throat could barely support human words. Do not get involved. Then it ran into the darkness, leaving only silence and bodies behind. On the way back to the cabin, Tucker couldn't think of anything else. What was that being? A cursed man? A monster that had decided to protect humans? Or a force as ancient as the Wendigo itself, now acting to defend an invaded territory? The next morning, a warning was left on his door, written in blood, on the wood. Those who meddle between monsters become food. The remaining survivors of Missoula were scattering into small clusters. Groups hiding in abandoned supermarkets, families locked in basements, a few in armed trailers at the city's edge. Communication between them was minimal, done through radio or light signals. No one trusted anyone. No one slept anymore. Jade woke up screaming every night. Tucker tried to stay calm, but even he could no longer bear the weight of fear. The forest wouldn't leave them in peace. The air felt denser, the sky darker even during the day, and the birds, they had completely vanished. Only the wind could be heard, and sometimes a sound like breathing coming from inside the earth. He didn't tell Jade what he'd heard. The werewolf had spoken, used words. That wasn't normal. It was a creature, yes, but there was someone inside it, and that someone was trying to stop something worse. The next night, while the girl slept with a knife under her pillow, Tucker searched his old laptop for similar cases. He found old records dating back to 1913 from a small town 100 kilometers away, Thompson Falls, where a series of similar deaths had occurred. Witnesses spoke of a wolf man who saved 2 children from a forest demon, but the story was never investigated. Authorities blamed the reports on trauma and the residents' isolation. It was as if the cycle repeated. A monstrous creature appeared, and another arose to contain it. A kind of dark balance. 2 days later, Tucker decided to search for more information at the state library in downtown Missoula. The place was destroyed. Doors broken down, windows covered with blood-stained cloths. Inside, everything was silent. He climbed to the second floor and found the librarian's body next to the anthropology section. He'd been impaled with a metal stand. Among the scattered books, he found a manuscript with notes on indigenous legends from the region. One passage, handwritten, chilled him. The Wendigo devours flesh, but fears cursed blood. When the beast's blood mixes with that of the earth, it hesitates. But when man's blood touches the beast's, chaos spreads. Tucker didn't know exactly what that meant, but it seemed like a warning. A prophecy or a curse. Maybe the werewolf was both protector and damnation. As he left the library, he saw something that made his blood run cold. 3 bodies hanging from lampposts, each skinned and with open chests, like an offering. But an offering to whom? And by whom? Behind them, written with the victim's coagulated blood on a store wall. You are not the meal. You are the warning. That night, Tucker didn't return to the cabin. He set up in an abandoned gas station, rigging traps around it and securing a nearly 360-degree view. He wanted answers, and they came. Shortly after midnight, the forest went completely silent. Everything froze. Even the wind stopped. Then it appeared. The werewolf. It emerged from the woods like a weary monster, dried blood clinging to its fur, heavy breathing. Tucker stood still, rifle aimed, but didn't shoot. The monster walked up to him and, with effort, dropped to its knees. It began to contort. Bones cracked, fur retracted, and then it changed. Kneeling in front of Tucker was a man, naked, covered in blood and mud. Lean, muscular body, sunken eyes. He looked about 35. His face was scarred, his gaze broken. My name is Rowan Eastwood, he said hoarsely, and I am the only mistake that can still save this city. Tucker said nothing. He just handed over a jacket. Rowan told him everything. He said that years ago he was attacked by something in a forest in Canada. He survived, but changed. Not just physically, his instincts, his mind, everything transformed. He tried to hide, to live far from people. But one day, he smelled the creature, the Wendigo. He said the Wendigo feeds on despair, that its hunger isn't just for flesh, but for human suffering. It draws near isolated towns, places where resources fail, where people begin to turn on each other. And when fear overtakes the survival instinct, it manifests. I follow it, Rowan whispered. Wherever it goes, I go, because no one else can face it. And because I'm a monster too. Tucker wanted to ask more, but an explosion on the other side of town cut the conversation short. One of the other survivors' traps had been triggered. They ran there and found what was left of a group of survivors. 2 men, a woman, and a child, all torn apart. But among them, Wendigo tracks. And once again, the warning. There are no heroes, only meat. Tucker looked at Rowan. There was no doubt anymore. The city was doomed, but at least now he knew what they were dealing with. And that, maybe, there was a chance. The first snow fell on the 3rd night after Tucker and Rowan's meeting. It was light, but it carried a silent omen. The city of Missoula, now blanketed in white, looked dead. The streets were empty, rooftops silent. The surrounding trees bent as if the weight of terror had forced them to yield. But it wasn't the snow that scared the townspeople that morning. It was the fact that the snow was tinged red. Tucker watched from the window of the abandoned gas station where he'd spent the night with Rowan and Jade. Outside, the falling snowflakes carried small red particles, dried blood mixed with the ice. On the ground, Darker stains drew a path through the streets as if someone, or something, had dragged bodies while it snowed. Jade cried softly in a corner. She barely spoke anymore, slept with a knife in hand, covered in coats that weren't hers. She had seen too much, and it still wasn't over. Rowan was restless, not afraid, but like a predator about to hunt. He paced back and forth, sniffing the air, analyzing every detail, not with human eyes, but with something more, a perception beyond the visible. "He's getting closer," he said. "The Wendigo knows I'm here, and he wants to end it before I get more help." "Help?" Tucker asked. "You think someone's coming? Have you seen what's left of this city?" "I wasn't talking about human help." They left shortly before noon, following the trail of red snow toward the northern residential area. There, where houses still had forgotten Halloween decorations on porches, the smell of death was stronger. Tucker gripped his rifle tightly. Rowan led the way, like a shadow. That's when they found the crucified bodies. 6 of them, hanging upside down from utility poles. Each with their mouths sewn shut with wire and symbols carved into their chests. Blood had dripped down to the asphalt, freezing into black puddles around them. "He's doing this to weaken people," Rowan said, observing. "He feeds his strength with despair." Tucker looked around. He felt they were being watched, and they were. From the top of an abandoned house, something was observing them. It was fast. Escaped before Tucker could even raise his weapon. Rowan, however, was already moving. He leapt over a car hood, climbed onto the roof, and vanished. Sounds of fighting echoed from the nearby homes. Tucker ran, Jade close behind, but was stopped by a vision that froze him. In the backyard of the next house, a woman walked in circles, muttering to herself. Her arms were covered in open wounds. Her face looked eaten. Not just skin was missing. Flesh was gone. She walked as if in a trance. Jade screamed, and that made her stop. The woman turned slowly. Her eyes were no longer there, only deep, pulsing black holes. Worms oozed from her mouth, and still she smiled. Before Tucker could react, Rowan appeared again, leaping over the fence and plunging his claws into the woman's chest. He slammed her to the ground, and upon impact, her body crumbled like dry clay. It was a shell used by the Wendigo to spy. "He's closer than we thought," Rowan said, panting. "He's already inside the city, and he's using the dead as eyes." They ran back to the station, but it was already too late. One of the traps had been destroyed. The side door ripped off, and the dog Jade had so fiercely protected was now hanging from the ceiling, still breathing, but with its abdomen opened. Jade screamed and ran to him. Tucker tried to stop her, but it was too late. The animal let out a low whimper and exploded. It was a trap. The Wendigo had left something inside the dog's body. When Jade got close, a sour stench filled the air, and a black goo burst out, hitting her face. She fell to the floor, screaming. Her skin burned. Rowan grabbed a cloth, poured water from a jug, and began wiping the girl's face as she cried, writhing, eyes closed. Tucker stood frozen. Despair hit him like a blade to the gut. The girl was going blind. And the Wendigo? He didn't just kill them. He played with them. That night, Rowan took his beast form again. In front of Tucker, without shame, he transformed with the pain of bones breaking, muscles twisting, claws emerging. Then he went out to hunt. "Take care of her," he said before vanishing into the darkness. Tucker stayed with Jade, cleaning her eyes, trying to stop infection, but he knew it wasn't just her body that was wounded. It was her soul, and she couldn't take another loss. Hours later, a sound in the forest made him raise his rifle. And then, Rowan returned, covered in blood, dragging something. It was a head. The head of one of the dead, but alive. The skin pulsed. The eyes blinked. The mouth smiled, and it whispered, "He is coming. And you already belong to him." The streets of Missoula were empty, but never silent. After the night of the red snow, the sounds changed. Now they came from below, from sewers, basements, cracks in walls, scratched whispers, voices mimicking dead townsfolk, children crying where there were no children, laughter cut short as if giggles had been interrupted by teeth. Tucker dug trenches around the station. He placed stakes, gasoline, shards of glass, whatever he had. But it all felt ridiculous in the face of what they were fighting. The evil here wasn't just physical. It seeped into thoughts, into memories, into the most intimate fears. Jade barely spoke. She was blind now. Eyes bandaged, face swollen. Tucker tried to keep her calm, but she heard the voices. "My dad. He's calling me," she whispered one morning. "Jade, your dad died in that church," Tucker replied, firm. "That thing calling you. It's not him." She cried silently. The little girl from before was gone. Rowan didn't return to human form for 2 whole days. He hunted non-stop. Every dawn he came back with pieces of bodies, some still alive, trembling, spitting nonsense. One of them was tied to a chair and began laughing uncontrollably. He laughed for 6 hours until his jaw dislocated, and then he choked on his own blood and died. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Rowan came back with a warning. "He's calling the others." "Others?" Tucker asked. "Like him. Similar species. Spirits of cold, of despair." I felt it. More of them are coming. The forest was alive. Ancient creatures forgotten by modern civilizations had awakened. And the werewolf's presence seemed to accelerate this. It was as if his existence had thrown off the balance of the territory, forcing evil to respond. "I'm the last of a lineage that never should have existed," Rowan confessed that night, staring at the shadows. "I was made to hunt what can't be hunted, but I've failed too many times. And now, it might be too late." The next day, the attack came. Not a direct attack. The Wendigo never did that. He sent others. Fog covered the city by dusk, thick like suspended cement. Tucker heard the first screams at 6 p.m. The local radio, which was still broadcasting automated distress messages, went silent for good. Rowan stood still for hours, sniffing the air, eyes closed. "They're everywhere." When the first of the others appeared, Tucker thought it was a man. But it wasn't. The creature had a humanoid body, yes, but its face was a mosaic of faces. A mask made of different skins, grotesquely stitched together. Its hands were long, bones exposed, and the mouth, or rather mouths, spoke in multiple voices. "Open up. Let us in. It's so cold out here." Tucker shot without hesitation. The body fell but didn't die. It kept crawling, the mouth screaming in different languages. Rowan leapt on it and tore it apart with his claws, growling like a cornered beast. Other creatures followed. Some looked like children, others crawled like spiders. None were natural. None obeyed the laws of physics. Some climbed walls, others slipped through cracks like smoke. It was hell invading the physical realm. Jade stayed in the basement corner, curled up, whispering a song her mother used to sing. Tucker guarded the staircase with whatever he could. Rowan was the only one who could fight with true ferocity, but even he began to bleed. The wolf was being overwhelmed. And then, the unthinkable happened. One of the creatures entered through the chimney. It was a shapeless mass, covered in teeth, eyeless. Tucker fired. It didn't help. As it was about to strike Jade, Rowan threw himself over her, taking the hit directly. And at that moment, something inside him changed. The werewolf didn't scream, but his eyes, once golden, turned pitch black. He rose, ribs exposed, and ripped the creature in half with a single blow. I said, "You will not touch her." The other creatures hesitated. For a moment they seemed afraid, and then they fled. Silence returned. Tucker dropped to his knees, Jade trembled, Rowan collapsed, chest wide open, but he was still breathing. "They're afraid of me," he whispered. "But he's coming." "Who?" Tucker asked. Rowan looked at the ceiling, at the sky hidden by clouds. "The first one. The original Wendigo, the king of the starved. I wounded him, and now he wants to destroy me." "And what about us?" Rowan looked at him, and for the first time smiled, a sad, resigned smile. "You are merely witnesses to extinction. The government didn't come. The army didn't come. Communication lines had been cut days ago. But the town still held a few desperate figures, armed, refusing to die without a fight. That morning, the group of hunters arrived in the city center. Middle-aged men, all known for their exaggerated stories at the local bar, now wore improvised tactical vests, armed with shotguns, rifles, and even an old flamethrower stolen from a construction depot. Their leader, Ralph Demps, ex-military and owner of a hunting supply store, was driven by rage. His wife and son had been found piled with other bodies in a basement, skinned, eyes gouged out, teeth replaced by black stones. Ralph wasn't looking for answers. He wanted to kill anything that breathed in that place. They found Tucker, Rowan, and Jade at the gas station. Rowan was in human form, wounded, bandaged with what was left of a bedsheet. Tucker tried to explain what they were up against, but Ralph wasn't listening. When he saw Rowan, all he saw was a monster. "I saw you. I saw his form," Ralph spat, aiming his rifle. "You're the one who brought this hell." "If you kill me, he'll come faster," Rowan answered calmly. "I'm the only barrier between you and the end." But hatred doesn't listen to reason. The men aimed the flamethrower. Tucker stepped between them and Rowan. "You want to die trying to be a hero?" Ralph hissed. "I just don't want to die like an idiot, shooting the only being still fighting for us," Tucker replied. In the end, the hunters decided to ignore Rowan. For now. They had a plan. Hunt the creature. Invade the forest, find the Wendigo, and tear it apart like real men. Tucker tried to stop them, said it wasn't something you found with flashlights, that it hid in shadows, in hunger, in thoughts. But Ralph and his men went anyway. 5 men, 3 dogs, 20 guns. They entered the forest at dusk. 2 hours later, the howls began. At 7 p.m., one of the dogs returned alone, with its jaw dislocated and eyes missing. By 8, the forest began to scream. It sounded like dozens of voices crying, moaning, pleading, and then laughing. But none of them were human. Rowan transformed. He ran like an unleashed beast. Tucker stayed with Jade, waiting, guarding the station with improvised barricades. At 10 p.m., something began moving in the center of town. Not a creature, but parts of the hunters. An arm crawled alone as if it had its own life. A head bit its own neck. A torso screamed its mother's name repeatedly. The parts were alive, corrupted. The Wendigo hadn't just killed. It had reconfigured the flesh. Tucker tried to burn the remains. They screamed as they burned. One of them, before turning to ashes, looked at him and said, "I still feel everything." Rowan returned at dawn, his body covered in new wounds, one ear missing, a deep gash in his leg. "They didn't fight," he said. They were absorbed. He's still feeding on them, and he got stronger. Tucker helped him to his feet, but there was no more hope. I'm the last wall, Rowan said, and this wall is crumbling. Jade woke up and asked, Are we going to die today? Rowan looked at her. Maybe, but not before he bleeds. They spent the day preparing the ground. They knew the next night would be the last. They set stakes, improvised Molotovs, traps with animal bones, lines with bells, glass shards in the windows, crosses made from scrap, not because they thought it would work, but because they needed to do something. Tucker looked at Rowan late that afternoon. What if you die? Rowan looked at the horizon, where the sky began turning purple. Then you run, because if I fall, he'll devour this city, and he'll leave here. And go where? Wherever there's hunger. The last light of day vanished, and with it came the cold. A cold that wasn't natural, that sank into the bones, into the teeth, into the mind. Tucker heard the bells ringing. He's here, Rowan said, already shifting form. And in the middle of the city, emerging from nothing, the Wendigo appeared. It didn't walk, it floated, like a shadow dressed in bones. The antlers spread like dry branches. The face was a living skull, with hollow but hungry eyes. Around it, the air warped, and with it came others, nameless creatures, deformed, starving. The final battle was about to begin. Everything fell silent. The entire city, once filled with years of civilization, now looked like a desecrated sacred ground. The sound of improvised bells stopped. Not even the wind moved. Not the rats, not the dead. Tucker stood on the station's roof, rifle aimed toward the horizon. Jade remained in the basement, locked in with supplies for 2 days. Rowan stood in the center of the street, beneath a clouded moon, claws spread, panting like a cornered beast. And then he appeared. The Wendigo, no longer hiding in shadows, but fully visible. It didn't walk. It glided over the ice-covered asphalt, followed by others. Creatures with no fixed form, as if the victim's fear shaped them. Some walked on all fours, others dragged bodies slung over their shoulders. One floated, mouth wide open like a well of wailing. But the Wendigo was the center of it all. It stood nearly 3 meters tall. The antlers twisted upward, like thorns from the earth. Its skin was white, but pulsed with black veins crawling beneath it like living snakes. The face, if it could be called that, looked like a moose skull fused with melting human features. The eyes, empty, completely. But they conveyed one thing: ancient hunger. Rowan took the first step. He was in werewolf form, but different from before. He looked older, more wounded. His muscles trembled, his breathing unsteady. He was already dying, and he knew it. Tucker aimed his rifle at one of the smaller creatures and fired. The bullet passed through the body, but it kept coming, as if it felt no pain. Tucker reloaded, fired again. Another one fell, but the others only moved faster. The street turned into a battlefield. Rowan lunged at the Wendigo with fury that seemed to pull fire from the ground. His claws slashed the air. The impact was brutal. They crashed, rolling, punching, biting, tearing. Each of Rowan's strikes tore flesh. Each touch from the Wendigo rotted the werewolf's body. Tucker came down and joined the fight. He wielded a hunting knife and an improvised axe. He attacked from the sides, striking the smaller monsters, cutting tendons, bringing them down and smashing skulls before they rose again. But they always came back. The creatures didn't fight like predators. They fought like incarnate hunger, each movement clumsy yet lethal. One bit Tucker's shoulder with such force it brought him to his knees. He only survived by jamming the knife into the thing's throat until the blade came out the back. Meanwhile, Rowan and the Wendigo were destroying everything around them. They crashed into cars, ripped up concrete, knocked down poles. The sounds of the fight were dry, heavy, claws against bone, teeth against muscle. Blood and viscera splattered like hell had descended onto that God-forsaken asphalt. Tucker ran to the abandoned church, one of the last places with solid cover. Inside, he found bodies of townsfolk who had taken refuge days earlier. None were whole. But at the altar, there was gasoline, matches, and a lighter. Rowan slammed the Wendigo against the church wall. Tucker didn't hesitate. He threw the gasoline, lit it. The monster burned, but didn't scream, just stared. Even engulfed in flames, its eyes remained empty, as if it took pleasure in the pain, as if it knew this wasn't the end. Rowan dropped to his knees, new wounds tearing open. Tucker ran to him, dragging him outside. "Is it over?" Tucker asked, breathless. Rowan, reverting to human form, bleeding from every part of his body, whispered, "No, it's only begun." The Wendigo walked out of the church, burned, yes, but whole. Its skin regenerated. The eyes gained color, a deep red. Now it was furious and focused. It raised a hand and pointed at Rowan. Tucker saw what seemed impossible, the Wendigo speaking, but not with human words. It roared with voices, many. Male, female, childlike, as if all its victims still lived inside it. And then it attacked. Rowan didn't run. He knew there was nowhere to go. He looked at Tucker one last time. "Protect her," and leapt into battle. The final battle lasted seconds. The Wendigo pierced Rowan's chest with a bone spear that grew from its own spine, lifted the werewolf into the air like a trophy. And what it did next wasn't killing. It was devouring. It bit the shoulder, then the stomach, then the throat. All slowly, like a feast, like an ancient god feeding on a worthy warrior. Rowan was gone. Tucker dropped to his knees, and the Wendigo, after swallowing the heart of the only creature that had ever challenged him, simply turned around and vanished. To where? Tucker didn't know, but one thing was clear. It wasn't the end. The silence after Rowan's death was unbearable. Tucker carried the mutilated body of the werewolf to the back of the abandoned church. He buried it with his bare hands, no tools, no prayers, no time. The tears dried before they could fall. Pain was replaced by a void that not even terror could fill. Jade didn't ask about him. She didn't need to. She felt it. With her eyes still blind, she held the necklace Rowan had left her days before, made of creature teeth, stained silver wire, and something else. Something that seemed to pulse, as if it were still alive. Tucker tried to keep his mind focused. But the minutes dragged, long and heavy as cement. The Wendigo had vanished, but the fear hadn't. And the air was different, colder, denser, more dead. It was as if the town itself had been sealed by an invisible presence. Radios went silent. Lights flickered. Electricity ceased. No connection worked. No signal, no compass, no GPS. Missoula had ceased to exist to the world. The next night, the trees began to bleed. Literally. Split trunks dripped a thick, dark red liquid, running down the branches as if the forest were mourning its dead. But Tucker knew it wasn't mourning. It was a warning. The earth was marked. He knew what he had to do. Rowan had held the Wendigo off long enough for him to escape with Jade. But there was nowhere left to run. Missoula was an open grave, and Tucker was a man buried alive with a single match between his fingers. The next morning, Tucker found one of the last survivors. Michael Penn, a nurse who had hidden in the hospital tunnels. He was dehydrated, delirious, but he had information. "I saw what he's doing in there," he said, eyes wide, barely blinking. He's building something, a nest, an altar, one body, made of many pieces. Tucker tried to understand, but Michael collapsed. He died a few hours later, coughing up his own lungs. With the help of old city maps, Tucker traced a route to the old community center in the northern part of town, the place where the Wendigo had last been seen. He knew Jade wouldn't survive another escape, so he left everything ready. Supplies, clothes, ammunition, and a note. "If I don't return, go at dawn, but don't look back." At nightfall, he went. He walked through the empty streets like a specter. Each step echoed between abandoned buildings, between stopped cars with open doors, between shattered lampposts. He arrived at the community center just before midnight, and there, he found the heart of it all. Inside the main gymnasium, hanging from basketball hoops, were dozens of bodies. Some alive, others not. All tied with human tendons, wrapped in torn clothes, eyes wide open. The living ones babbled nonsense. Some laughed, others begged for help. But all stared at the center of the court. There, atop a throne of flesh, was the Wendigo. It didn't move. It was feeding, in a trance. The flesh around it pulsed like a heart. It looked like an organic being, alive, breathing, and the smell was worse than anything Tucker had ever experienced. The stench of iron, decay, and fear sweat. The Wendigo opened its eyes, and for the first time, it spoke directly to him. "You are not worthy." The voice was like 1,000 voices mixed together. Deep, high, human, and inhuman. It was as if the entire city spoke at once. Tucker raised his rifle and fired. The bullet blasted part of the Wendigo's chest. It didn't scream. It just laughed. "You feed me with your fight." The throne collapsed. The gym walls began to close in, as if reality were folding in on itself. Tucker ran, but the Wendigo was on him in seconds. It was no longer a physical being. It was pure hunger. Claws pierced his abdomen. Blood gushed. Pain came like a wave of fire. But Tucker didn't fall. With the last of his strength, he pulled out Jade's necklace, now in his pocket, and plunged it into the Wendigo's chest. The creature screamed. For the first time, it screamed. The necklace seemed to burn, like silver against cursed flesh. The Wendigo tried to back away, but Tucker held on. "Take me, you bastard, but she lives." Then, with his free hand, he pulled the improvised napalm grenade strapped to his waist and activated it. The explosion was sharp. The gym collapsed. The blast could be heard on the other side of town. For a moment, it felt like everything had ended. The flames consumed the gym, swallowing the altar of flesh, the hanging bodies, the walls tainted by evil. The fire lit up Missoula like a final breath of resistance. And then, silence returned. But it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of waiting. Jade woke with a tremor. She was alone in the basement, eyes covered, body weak, but alive. She felt her way to the stairs, climbed with difficulty, called out for Tucker. But no one answered. She found the note, read it with her fingers, slowly, just as he'd taught her. She cried. Even without sight, she knew. Tucker had given everything. Like Rowan, like all the others. But something wasn't right. When she left the basement, the air felt different. Lighter. The cold had ceased. The fog began to lift. The sky, still covered in dark clouds, showed a sliver of light on the horizon. The first sign that evil had pulled back. Jade walked to the main street. The ground was covered in ash. The city was a ruin, but quiet, clean, empty. She didn't know the way. But something inside her guided her. She walked for hours. heard only her own steps. No more screams, no more cries. The forest, in the distance, stood still. The buildings burned. The houses open, hollow, without bodies. At the entrance of the destroyed gym, she found a piece of burned fabric. It was from Tucker's jacket. There was no body, no blood, only ashes. And among the ashes, the necklace. The girl held it with both hands. It was still warm, still pulsing. She fastened it around her neck and fell to her knees, crying. Not just for the man who saved her, but for everything that had been lost. Slowly, things began to return. Cars started. Radios began transmitting again. Static at first, then real broadcasts. Helicopters flew over the city days later. A rescue team found Jade walking down the road, alone, clothes torn, the necklace tight around her neck. She didn't say much, only that monsters came. And a man turned into a wolf to protect her. No one believed her. Missoula was classified as a disaster zone. The bodies were explained as wild animal attacks combined with mass hallucinations. The media went silent after a week. No serious investigation was conducted. The names of the dead became numbers. Families received no answers. And the city was forgotten. Months later, at a military base in Colorado, a doctor performed a routine checkup on a young survivor from Missoula. He noticed that even with her damaged eyes, her pupils were regenerating. And when he placed the stethoscope on her chest, the doctor silently stepped back. For a moment, he heard two hearts beating. Asterisk, asterisk. The forest, now quiet, hid what was left. But beneath the earth, somewhere in the deep, forgotten roots, something still breathed. Something hungry, something patient. Because evil never dies. It only waits. Dylan's brutal experience in Missoula is a chilling reminder that when ancient hunger rises, not even monsters are alone in the dark. The war between predator and predator has just begun, and we'll be here to witness what crawls out of the ashes. Like this video if you felt the dread in those fog-covered streets. Comment below which moment struck you the hardest. The Wendigo's whisper, or the werewolf's final stand. And share it with someone who still believes small towns are safe from old legends. And if you're bold enough to face what's still out there, subscribe to Mr. Midnight Horror and turn on notifications, because next time, you might be the only one left to hear the howls.